Husband divorced me for being poor. 2 years later, he drove past me in a Ferrari I owned. Renata Cole was 38 years old when her husband handed her divorce papers on a Tuesday evening and told her, with the particular composure of a man who had been rehearsing the conversation, that he deserved more than what their life together had become. She drove a 9-year-old Civic with a cracked sun visor. She wore her work clothes until they frayed at the cuffs before she replaced them. She cooked from scratch most nights because the grocery math worked better that way. And when Devon's friends came over, she served food and was pleasant and did not speak at length. Because Devon had made it clear over time that what he valued in a social setting was a woman who let the room breathe around him. His friends called her Devon's quiet wife. Devon let them. He handed her the papers and said he needed to be with someone who matched his ambitions. He said it without cruelty, which was almost worse. He had prepared the sentence. He had decided that the sentence was kind. She had no idea that the development company she had been building in the 18 months since her uncle passed and left her his real estate holdings was worth, at the time Devon handed her those papers, just under $4 million. What Devon Cole did not know, not once in 6 years of marriage, was what the name on those holdings actually meant, or whose signature was on the lease agreement for the luxury auto dealership that had just opened on Piedmont Road in Charlotte, or which company had purchased the midnight blue Ferrari that would be sitting in the showroom when he walked in 2 years later to take it for a test drive. He would find out the same way he found out everything important. Too late. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came through the east window of the kitchen in Renata's rental apartment, the way it had always come through every kitchen she had ever occupied, unhurried, indifferent to what the previous night had held, filling the room on its own schedule. She had been in the apartment on Park Road for 3 months now, since the divorce was finalized, and she had moved out of the house that Devon had kept under the terms of the settlement, which had favored him in the way that settlements favor people who have attorneys who understand that a woman who appears to have very little will not fight hard for more. She had let them believe that. She had planted a window box on the sill when she moved in, herbs, practical ones, the kind that actually got used, rosemary and thyme, and a compact basil that was already outgrowing its corner of the box and needed to be cut back. She trimmed it on mornings when she had the time, the way her grandfather had maintained the tool shed behind his house in Virginia Beach, not because anyone was watching, but because attention was its own form of respect. Her grandfather, Elwood Briggs, had built and sold 3 properties in Norfolk before Renata was born, and he had spent his working life teaching her, mostly by example. That wealth was not what you showed, but what you had positioned. He had a saying he used when she was impatient, which was often when she was young: the tree that grows fastest in a drought is the one with the deepest roots. Don't rush the root. He had passed 8 years ago, before she met Devon. She thought about him most on mornings like this one, when the light came in, and she was making plans she could not yet say aloud to anyone who would repeat them. She had met Devon at a professional development event for small business owners in Charlotte 5 years before that Tuesday evening with the divorce papers. He was running the Q&A portion of a panel on commercial real estate, moderating with the easy fluency of a man who was most comfortable when the room's attention had a clear direction, and that direction was him. He was sharp, and he was handsome, and he sought her out afterward with an intention that felt at the time like recognition. He sold commercial insurance for a regional firm. He had ambitions, which he described often and specifically: a directorship by 40, a portfolio of investment properties, a life that reflected what he was capable of. He talked about money the way some people talked about weather, constantly as a shared condition that affected everyone, with an implicit assumption that his relationship to it was more sophisticated than most. She had liked him. She had found his confidence attractive before she understood that it was not confidence in what he had built, but in what he intended to take. The distinction took years to become clear. Her Uncle Wendell's real estate holdings had come to her through a will that had been in place for 11 years and that Devon had never once asked to see. Wendell had owned 9 parcels across Charlotte and Concord, commercial lots, a small mixed-use building, 2 residential rentals, and a stretch of undeveloped land on the north end of the city that had been quietly appreciating since he purchased it in the early 90s. He had managed them himself through a holding company whose name meant nothing to anyone who had not been told what it was. Renata had been the only person he trusted with the full picture. She had known, for the last 4 years of her marriage, exactly what she stood to inherit. She had said nothing. Devon's phone had been the first thing that told her what his ambitions actually looked like close up. She had not gone looking. She had picked it up from the nightstand on a Wednesday morning in October to check the time when her own phone was charging across the room, and the screen lit with a message she did not mean to read and could not unread. The woman's name was Priscilla. The message was not ambiguous. It referred to the previous weekend, to a hotel in Charleston that Renata had been told was a work conference, and to a plan for the following Thursday that Devon had described to her as a client dinner. Her face remained perfectly calm. She set the phone down exactly where she found it, angled the same way, screen down. She got up. She went to the kitchen. She made coffee and stood at the east-facing window with the mug in both hands and let the morning come in and let the information settle. She did not confront him that morning. She did not confront him that week. She was a businesswoman. She understood that you did not act on the first reading. You took 3 measurements and compared them before you moved. She went back through the months that were available to her. Jacket pockets when she did laundry. Credit card statements on the joint account she had always had access to but never examined closely. Calendar entries on the shared household calendar that she now read with a different eye. She built a timeline. He had been seeing Priscilla for at least 14 months. She was a sales director at a property management firm, 34 years old, who drove a leased German sedan, and whose professional profile showed a woman with the kind of visible presentation Devon had always described, without quite saying directly as what he had envisioned for his life. Polished, prominent, a woman whose appearance confirmed his own ambition back to him. A hotel in Savannah in March, another in Asheville in June, a jewelry store purchase in October that had never arrived at their home. She was everything Devon had decided he deserved, and everything he had quietly communicated over 6 years of small corrections and strategic silences that Renata was not. Renata sat with all of it for one evening, when she had written the last entry on the timeline and set the pen down and looked at what she had built. She did not feel what she had expected. She felt clear. The particular clarity that comes when you have confirmed something you already knew and can stop spending energy on the question of whether it is true. She picked up her phone and called the one person she knew would understand exactly what she needed. "The timing has changed," she said. "I need to move the holding company into active operation. I need an attorney who handles divorce proceedings and asset protection simultaneously. Someone who understands those 2 things are related." "How soon?" her financial advisor asked. "By the end of the week," she said. She ended the call. She went to bed and slept without difficulty, which did not surprise her. The part of her that kept watch had finally been given something concrete to do. Her attorney was a woman named Felicia Drummond. who had a practice on South Tryon Street that had been operating for 16 years, and whose reputation in Charlotte family law was built entirely on the kind of cases where the financial picture was more complicated than it appeared at first reading. Felicia had a way of listening that made you feel she was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation and was simply waiting for you to arrive where she already was. She reviewed the documentation Renata brought on a Friday morning: the holding company structure, the property portfolio valuation, the inheritance documentation, the timeline of Devon's relationship with Priscilla that Renata had assembled from the receipts and statements and calendar entries. "He's petitioning for divorce," Renata said. "He's going to file at the end of the month. Does he know about Wendell's holdings? He knows my uncle left me something. He never asked what. He assumed it was modest." Felicia's expression did not change, but something in her stillness shifted in the way that very good attorneys shift when a case reveals itself to be different in scope than the intake form suggested. "The holding company was established before the marriage?" 3 years before, Renata said. "My uncle put it in my name when he updated the estate documents. I have been a named trustee since then." "And the inheritance itself?" "Transferred to me at his death, 8 months before Devon handed me those papers." Felicia was quiet for a moment. "He filed first. That is fine. What it means is that he believes he is in control of the timing." She looked at Renata steadily. "He is not. Real power operated in quiet rooms. Renata's aunt, her uncle Wendell's widow, was a woman named June, who lived in the same house in Concord that she and Wendell had shared for 40 years, and who was, at 71, the sharpest person Renata knew who was not paid to be sharp. June had watched Devon at family gatherings across 6 years with the particular attention of a woman who has outlasted several versions of the kind of man he was, and recognizes each one on sight. When Renata came to her that Saturday and laid out what she had found, the phone, the timeline, the pattern she had built from receipts and statements and calendar entries, June listened without a word. When Renata finished, June said, "I know." She said it the way people say it when they mean they have known for a long time, but understood that saying so earlier would have helped nothing and possibly made things worse. "Wendell always said that man looked at you like a ledger entry," June said. "Not like a person. Like an asset he was evaluating for current versus future usefulness." She reached across the table and covered Renata's hand with hers, the way she had covered Renata's hand at her grandfather's funeral and at her uncle's, and at every moment that had required it. "He evaluated wrong. That is his problem now, not yours." She was quiet for a moment. "Your uncle used to say, the ones who count you out are the ones handing you the advantage. Let them count. Let them count all the way to the end. Because by the time they finish, they will have told you everything you need to know about how they see the world. And that information is worth more than anything they walked away with." Renata drove back to Charlotte that evening with the windows down and the radio off, and she let herself think clearly for the first time in weeks, without the weight of what she did not yet know pressing against the thinking. By the time she reached the city limits, she had made 3 decisions. The first was to let Devon file, and to let the divorce proceed on his timeline, because his timeline served her purpose. The second was to accelerate the dealership opening from the following quarter to the current one. The third was about the Ferrari specifically, the midnight blue car already titled to the dealership, already on the floor under the showroom lights, and the decision about that one she did not put into words even in her own mind. She just let it sit there. She trusted the situation to develop. 3 weeks after the divorce papers landed, Devon came to Felicia's office for the mediation session with his attorney and the posture of a man who was certain he understood what he was walking into. He was certain of very little, it turned out. that was actually true. Felicia presented the full asset picture on Renata's behalf, the holding company structure predating the marriage by 3 years, the inherited portfolio transferred at Wendell's death 8 months prior, the operating dealership on Piedmont Road, and the development project on the north parcel that had broken ground the previous month. Devon's attorney went very still partway through the presentation, in the way that attorneys go still when a case reveals itself to be categorically different from the brief they were given. Devon's expression was harder to read. He was good at composure. But composure is a performance, and every performance has a seam. And Renata had spent 6 years learning exactly where his seams were. She watched the seam open. The mediation concluded with a settlement that reflected, with complete accuracy, the financial picture that Devon had always believed was the full picture. He received the house and its $67,000 in equity. He received the joint savings account. His attorney, working from what Devon had told him, had never asked about assets predating the marriage or held through inherited entities, and Felicia had answered every question asked, and not one that wasn't. Renata did not feel satisfaction at the table. She felt the quiet of a person who has completed a phase of work and is ready for the next one. She signed the final papers. She drove to the dealership. She walked the floor under the showroom lights and looked at the inventory and thought about her grandfather's voice and the roots he had been talking about. She was going to need more room to grow. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Devon received the house, which had $67,000 in equity and a mortgage that would require 15 more years of his income to close. He received the joint savings account, which held $8,400. He received a settlement that reflected, completely accurately, the financial picture of a woman who appeared to own very little. Felicia had structured the asset protection with the precision of someone who understood that the goal was not to hide what Renata had, but to ensure that what Renata had was correctly and legally documented as predating and being entirely separate from the marital estate. It was not concealment. Every document was legitimate, dated, filed, and available to anyone who thought to look. Devon's attorney had not looked because Devon had told him there was nothing to find. Devon was very good at telling people what he wanted them to believe. Renata signed the final papers on a Tuesday. Then she went to the dealership on Piedmont Road and walked the floor and looked at the inventory under the showroom lights and thought about what her grandfather had said about roots. She had been growing roots for a long time. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in September, 2 years after the divorce was finalized. Renata was in a site meeting on the north parcel, which was now in active development, a mixed-use project with 32 residential units and street-level commercial space. The kind of development that changed a block's character. Her site manager flagged her down from across the lot with a look that said it was something she'd want to hear. She stepped away from the group and answered. It was Marcus, the floor manager at the Piedmont dealership. "Miss Cole," Marcus said. "I have a customer here for a test drive of the Rosso." He paused. "He's your ex-husband. I recognized him from the photo in your office. I wanted you to know before we proceeded." Renata stood on a lot that was going to be worth 4 times what she had paid for it in 3 years, in the wind off the north end of the city, and she was quiet for a moment. "Send me the intake form when he completes it," she said. "And Marcus, go ahead and process the test drive." She ended the call. She stood there another moment. Then she went back to the site meeting. Devon came back to the dealership the following Saturday to discuss purchase terms. He had researched the car thoroughly. He knew the retail price, the manufacturer options, the current market supply. He had, by Marcus's account when he checked in that morning, arrived with the air of a man who had prepared for a negotiation and expected to win it. He did not know whose name was on the dealership's operating license. He did not know whose company had placed the factory order for that specific vehicle, or whose signature was on the title that would transfer at point of sale. He did not know, because he had never asked those questions about anything connected to Renata, and the habit of not asking had followed him past the end of the marriage. He asked to speak with the owner about the price. Marcus told him the owner was available and showed him to the office at the back of the showroom. Renata was seated behind the desk when the door opened. The desk was clear except for a folder and a pen. She had chosen the chair before he arrived, and she had chosen how she would be sitting in it, and she was sitting in it exactly that way when Devin Whitfield Cole appeared in her doorway and understood, in the space of 3 seconds, where he was. She watched his face. She had always been good at reading Devin's face, better than he knew. She had spent 6 years in close proximity to every expression he owned, and she could distinguish the ones that were real from the ones that were chosen. And what moved across his face in those 3 seconds was entirely chosen. A recalibration executed at speed. The warm but surprised version of himself deployed like a tool he had used many times before. She did not offer the opening he was building toward. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She opened the folder. She set the documents out one at a time, the way her grandfather had set tools out at the start of a job, each in its place, nothing surplus. The dealership operating license with her name as principal. The title document for the vehicle, showing ownership. The holding company registration. The property portfolio summary. The development project overview for the north parcel, with the current assessed value on the cover page. She did not explain them. She let him read. Devin looked at the documents for a long time. She watched his jaw tighten once and then release. She watched his eyes move across the holding company registration and stop. "The price on the vehicle is the price on the vehicle," she said. "I don't negotiate on new inventory." He looked up at her. His voice, when he found it, was careful. "Renata, I didn't know any of this. I know you didn't." Her voice was even and without edge. "You didn't ask. That was always a decision you made." He tried once more. He said something about how they might have approached things differently. How, if he had understood the full picture, and she let him reach the end of the sentence without interrupting and without helping and without responding to it when it arrived, because the sentence was not for her. It was the kind of sentence a man constructs so that a decision becomes a misunderstanding. She had no interest in reclassifying his decisions. She closed the folder. "The car is available if you'd like to purchase it," she said. "Marcus will handle the paperwork. The price is on the window." She stood and picked up the folder and held it at her side. "It was good to see you, Devin." She walked out onto the showroom floor. She paused near the front display window and looked at the street for a moment, at the city moving past in the ordinary way it always moved, indifferent to anything particular that was happening inside any given building on any given Saturday. She had spent 6 years being underestimated in that marriage. She had spent 2 years growing in the space his certainty had left open. She did not look back at the office doorway. There was nothing in that direction that she needed. 16 months later, Renata Cole was sitting on the back porch of the house she had purchased in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte. A bungalow she had renovated herself in stages, making deliberate choices about every surface. The way her grandfather had taught her that a thing done correctly the first time saved you the cost of doing it twice. The porch looked out over a yard she had planted with intention, a fig tree in the corner, 2 long raised beds along the south fence that were already producing past what she could eat alone. She was not alone. There was a man named Andre, who was an architect, and who had come into her orbit through the development project on the north parcel. He had consulted on the residential unit layouts, and who had a quality she had learned to value more than any other, which was that he was interested in her actual life and not in what her actual life represented. He was inside now, reading something, and the sound of him in the house was a sound she was still getting used to and had decided she was glad of. The North Parcel project had been completed 8 months prior. The mixed-use development had been appraised at $6, $3 million on completion. Against a total development cost that left a margin Felicia had helped her structure into the next phase of the holding company's growth. There were 2 more parcels in Renata's name now. There would be more. Devon had purchased the Ferrari. She knew this because Marcus had processed the transaction, and she had seen the paperwork. He had financed it. At his income, the monthly payment was not comfortable. She had no further information about Devon's life and had not sought any. What reached her came unsolicited, and she noted it and moved on. She had heard through a mutual acquaintance that Priscilla had relocated to Raleigh. She heard this once, stored it as a data point, and thought no further about it. The fig tree was beginning to show fruit. It was small and still hardening and would not be ready for another few weeks, but it was there, which was the part that mattered. She had planted it as a bare root cutting the previous winter when there was nothing to see and no guarantee of anything, and she had watered it and mulled it and given it the conditions it needed, and here was the result. Her grandfather's voice came to her on mornings like this one. She did not try to hold it. She just let it sit with her in the early light and be part of the quiet. The tree that grows fastest in a drought is the one with the deepest roots. She had always known where her roots were. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.